Hi, I'm Cheyenne Cook and I'm the owner of CK Solutions. We specialize in industrial hygiene here in Denver. Stay tuned to hear about how we help clean up the messes others have left behind as we speak with some of our esteemed colleagues and friends.
Hello everyone and welcome to CK Solutions Safety Talks. So today we have Kyle Baber. He's the owner of Carlyle Investment Group. Kyle, will you tell us a little bit about Carlyle Investment Group?
Sure. Carlyle Investment Group is a family-owned company, series of companies that is involved in several different interrelated aspects. So we do our primary focus is on environmental remediation, and that includes asbestos, mold, methamphetamine, contaminated properties, asbestos, hazardous waste of pretty much any kind. The second aspect that we do is demolition. So we can do, structural demolition of property, site preparation, and we also do a lot of interior demolition that either involves hazardous materials or it's just straight clean demolition. We can do both. We call it more than demolition, it's deconstruction. So what we try to do is get in ahead of general contractors and cut out components of buildings so that makes it easy for them to go in and put back whatever tenant finish they're going to have. The third aspect is we also do restoration on some of our smaller jobs. When we do flood cuts or demolish asbestos ceilings, walls, etc., we have a team of individuals that can go back in and put that material back. So we can do flooring, cabinets, drywall, painting, and finish the property. So we can handle start to finish. We can remove the hazardous material, we can demolish what needs to be demolished for a tenant finish, and then in some aspects we can put that back. And then the final thing that we do is we're also involved in real estate investment. So a lot of times these properties that are environmentally compromised have a huge cleanup bill and restoration bill associated with them, and some owners can't do it. So we have a program where we can offer to buy properties as is. We will go in and do the cleanup, do the restoration, and then we will invest, either keep the properties for rentals or we sell them on the open market.
Yes, and for those of you that don't know, Carlyle Investment Group is one of our trusted partners. Always do great work. We love working with them. And so it's good to see you again, Kyle.
As well as you. Thanks for having me.
So how has CIG, or Carlyle Investment Group, how have you guys been going above and beyond on occupational safety hazards?
Well, I've been in the industry for 30 plus years, and obviously we're dealing with very hazardous materials, hazardous situations, and I've always had a belief that safety is a culture that you bring, and it's something that is just woven into the fabric of your employees, of your business. We do extensive training on each and every aspect of what we do. Obviously, we have to have special certifications and training to deal with the hazardous waste industries. The asbestos has its own, the methamphetamine has its own, lead has its own, mold has its own. So we get that. Those have to be refreshed every year. So we're continually, kept up to date with changes in the industry. Other things, just general construction can be hazard in itself. So, my supervisors are taught and trained to, have daily safety talks regarding, every aspect of slips, trips, and falls, hard hats, safety glasses. And then we also have a program where we specifically target certain things. For instance, when we're working in attics in the summer, obviously heat exhaustion, heat stroke is a very important thing. So we really school our employees on heat exhaustion and what to look out for, how to mitigate it, how to control it. And my philosophy is safety is not one person's job. Everybody is responsible for their own safety and the safety of everybody they work for. So rather than having a single, safety coordinator or manager that goes around and checks everything, I put it on everybody. You guys show up to work in good health, make sure that you and everybody you're working with goes home in that same condition. And, if you see an unsafe situation, don't pass it off to somebody else, address it, deal with it, and man, safety is an accountability thing. So I make everybody accountable for everybody's safety. And in 30 plus years, I've never had a lost time accident. So my EMR is very good.
Yeah, I love that. Sometimes we talk about safety with other people just out and about, and it seems like they could not care less. So it's good that you're keeping everyone that you're working with accountable and safe, at the end of the day. So that was kind of one of my questions. You answered one of them, but I would like you to go a little bit more in depth on it.
Sure.
What are some of the big occupational hazards you see in your day-to-day work?
Well, like I said, I mean, we're dealing with, pretty much all aspects of construction and demolition. And, I kind of got to break it off into so the hazardous materials that we deal with, man, each and every one of those has its own short-term and long-term consequences. Let's take asbestos, for instance. There's really no the short-term kind of things we have to deal with. We're dealing in enclosed work areas. There's electricity involved. There's water involved. So you have that constant watch where you got to make sure everything's GFI'd and, water's not getting into the electrical things. You're not blowing breakers and things. So that's a common thing. Also, a lot of times we're working on ladders and scaffolds, and so people are removing the asbestos and the mold and dropping things down. Then people are on the ground, cleaning it up. So you have to be aware of what's going on in your surroundings, so that people aren't walking under scaffolding and getting things dropped on their heads. The long-term consequences of some of these things, asbestos carries with it a whole aspect of respiratory diseases. So it's important that these guys, keep their respirators maintained. We keep filter cartridges appropriate for the contaminant, readily available on site. We have protective clothing and PPE available, and it's required on all these sites. So, that's kind of how we deal with the hazardous materials. You get into meth. I mean, there's a whole bunch of different chemical hazards, involved in the precursors, in the methamphetamine manufacture method. And recently, one of the more things that I'm really hammering people on is, one, you go into these places, you find sharps, you find pipes, you find paraphernalia that is used to inject, smoke, whatever the methamphetamine. Well, obviously that carries with it this whole set of issues. You don't want to stick your hand in a pile and get stuck with needles and things like that. So we have to be very careful and continually monitor how guys deal with that. Also, we find a lot of times leftover product. We find bags of methamphetamine, bags of heroin, and recently, man, we're finding a increased incidence in fentanyl in these they're using to cut the heroin and the methamphetamine with. And fentanyl is a highly toxic substance that even contact with your skin can lead to serious health consequences and death. I mean, it doesn't take very much. So, we have to constantly keep up on that and be able to read and understand laboratory reports and what concentrations these materials are. And then in the construction part and the demolition part, I mean, you're dealing with heavy equipment. You've got to respect the views of the operators. We coach our guys on hand signals and how to contact the operators so that they can't hear. So you've got to use a series of hand signals to get their attention. Trenching, confined spaces. That's one of the things when I was coming up. Confined spaces was something they just send you down into crawl spaces and tunnels and things like that. And I believe that is one of the scariest aspects of what we do. And so confined spaces, crawl spaces, trenches, not only for, oxygen depleted atmospheres, but there's all kinds of gnarly things in those kinds of things, spiders, snakes, various things that, you don't want your employees bitten by and dealt with. So, it's just a consciousness of every aspect of what we do involves a potential hazard. And so it's hard to, just sit there and constantly say, okay, well, what is the number one thing? They're all number one. I mean, all of these things can lead to illness, all these things can lead to injury, and many of these things can lead to death, either in the short term or the long term. So let's get back to what I said, that safety is a culture, and everybody has to constantly be aware, and everybody has to constantly be looking out for their people. So, there's plenty of hazards to deal with. And like I said, we try to address the most imminent ones on a daily basis of what they're going to see. But, overall, I mean, everybody gets the gist, and we provide them with the tools and the equipment to keep themselves and their coworkers safe.
So what would you say are the most dangerous and common kinds that you see?
Oh, I would say confined space, having somebody go into a crawl space or an atmosphere that doesn't have oxygen. And you get in there, it doesn't take very long to be deprived of oxygen before you have a man down. So confined space, I would say, is number one. Heat exhaustion in the summertime is extremely, especially now, in the dog days of summer when it's 100 degrees. And so we try to, when we're doing attics and things, we try to set the guys in there at 5:30 in the morning when it's cool. And, I have a temperature cutoff. When that temperature gets above 100 degrees, then we stop for the day and don't do it. Electrical hazards are, shocks, fires. It's really hard to say what the number one is. Like I said, in my opinion, crawl spaces and confined spaces is the scariest thing to me. I really enforce people going into those spaces. Young worker guys will tend to dive off and do things, and they don't have that kind of fear. I really harp on that. Confined space and heat exhaustion, I think, are the two biggest ones that I worry about.
Interesting. That's not what I would have thought. I would have thought, just being careful around air contaminants, mold or something. But I'm kind of surprised it's not what I would have thought.
Well, I mean, those kinds of things like the asbestos and the lead and the mold, man, because we do that all the time, and everybody is trained and tested on respiratory protection. I mean, that just comes second nature. I mean, they go into a building, they put their mask on just like you would put a hard hat on. So, that, because of the culture, that has just become part of the day-to-day routine. And it's the things you do every day, all the time, you kind of build into your mind a muscle memory for safety. Okay, I got to do this. And it's the new things and the things that don't happen all the time that I think are way more dangerous. And that's where it's like, okay, here's a crawl space. Oh, let's go down in here and do this. Whereas you haven't done that and you kind of forget. And that's where injuries and things happen, is when it's not in the forefront of your brain, or it's not a habit yet. So
that makes sense. So I know you said earlier that you work with property managers. So what kind of advice can you give to property managers when it comes to environmental hazards?
Well, I mean, the first thing that I think property managers should do, and what I see that they're very lax in, is they've got to get an internal program of how to address and how to identify what they have. Most property managers, they have apartments and they have a flood or a leak. And the first thing they do is they send their maintenance guys, and they're okay, fix the leak. So they start cutting into walls and doing, and repairing the leak, and dealing with it. But, and then they'll call me, oh, we got some mold. And so I end up showing up and I'm like, okay, well, is this drywall? We got to open some things up. Is this drywall been tested for asbestos? Is the flooring asbestos? Is the ceiling asbestos? Well, we don't know. So, what they've done is they put tenants at risk of exposure. Their maintenance people are exposure. And then, it adds a huge cost to their properties. Whereas, they need to get that. So it's just their lack of knowing what environmental hazards they have. And, most property management groups are reactive as opposed to proactive. And there's reasons for that. Cost, timing, just lack of knowledge. And so I have a program where, you know, I offer 2-hour awareness training to the property managers. You'll come in, sit down with your maintenance team, and just go over very briefly in 2 hours and kind of address, okay, here's what you need to be looking out for. Here's how we get you there. And knowing when to not move forward is probably the best advice I can give to the property manager. All right, we got this thing. Obviously, we got to get this turned off. We have water gushing in here. You know, small holes, deal with it, get it mitigated, and then call in, you know, a professional that can come in and assess the environmental hazards, because, you know, it's not their thing. The best thing to do is, you know, obviously survey and inspect your properties for asbestos and lead paint, and keep that around so that your maintenance people are aware and know, and so that you can address it before it becomes a spill. And, you know, you've got an apartment that's been contaminated, and, you know, that sends you down a whole nother rabbit hole of regulations and, you know, responses that is, in the long run, is way more expensive and costly than the original, you know, inspections and testing.
So what would you say is unique about like the Colorado regulations compared to some of the other states?
Well, I mean, Colorado has its own regulation. All 50 states are governed under the EPA rules. I know, you know, EPA has a rule that deals with, you know, asbestos, workplace hazards, et cetera, et cetera. You know, OSHA has its own set of rules. Very few property managers can, you know, address, you know, if you go to a property manager and go, okay, what's the OSHA construction standard that governs your maintenance people? My guess is very few of them are going to be able to tell you which one it is. Same with this, so Colorado, so all states, let's take Wyoming. So Wyoming is an EPA state. They follow the EPA HERA regulations. That's what you're bound to do. And then the OSHA regulations overlap. So when you go to Wyoming to do an asbestos abatement, you follow those rules and regulations. Those rules and regulations are also in place in Colorado, but Colorado has also placed a state regulation on top of that that is a little more stringent than what an EPA or OSHA would require you to do. So in those regulations, they talk about how much material constitutes a spill, how much material, you know, you can disturb before you're required to permit it. It provides for licensing and certifications, both at the EPA and state level, for companies as well as individuals in the removal aspect, contracting aspect, and also in the consulting aspect. You know, like CK Solutions has to carry a state license, and their individuals have to be state and EPA certified to perform these activities. So, you know, people just can't go in and take a sample and take it down. I mean, there's specific criteria for sampling, for analysis, for response, for management. And it's really, you know, cumbersome for a property management company to do. I mean, it would be a full-time position within a housing authority to monitor all those regulations, all the aspects, and certifications and training and things. I mean, it's a full-time job. So, you know, they rely on third-party individuals such as CK Solutions and me to, you know, help them identify hazards and then develop response actions and then mitigate those hazards. So it's a complex thing, and, you know, it squeezes budgets, it squeezes time, and, you know, it's kind of one of those things that's not a problem until it's a problem.
So for some of these property managers, I know you also deal with like meth contamination. How can you tell if your property has been meth contaminated?
Well, one, and this goes to property managers too, it's really important that landlords and property managers have a routine inspection of their properties. And it doesn't happen. I mean, so, you know, you need to have routine inspections to make sure people are following the rules, from smoking cigarettes to having pets, you know, to have unauthorized persons in their buildings, and to make sure that their maintenance and the properties are maintained. And if you do that, you know, with meth, I mean, meth contaminated properties happen, I mean, they can happen right away, but most of them, it's a building up of an addiction. So it starts, it builds, it gets worse, and it just, it's a downhill slide. But there's certain aspects that you can do, just observe this. Obviously, you look around for paraphernalia. I mean, there's people doing entering and coming at odd hours, on a continual basis, people out in cars. A lot of things you see is coverings on the windows, whether they be plastic or tinfoil. You will get, odors in the adjacent apartments when the people are using. If they're smoking, if they're injecting, then not so much. But one of the things that happens with meth addiction is you can't sleep. It causes an insomnia. So people are up at all times of the hours. They call it tweaking. So people are tweaking and they're doing weird things. They're taking things apart. They're loud. They're obnoxious, and their personalities. If you know your tenants and you see these personality changes happening, and they become kind of aggressive, they become loud, they kind of start losing their sense of space and where they are, they become very solitary, and they don't, if you had a tenant that was very friendly and outgoing and talked to you on a regular basis, and all of a sudden, man, they're kind of introverted and they're kind of sketchy and they're trying to avoid contact. And then they talk in these grandiose things and become, when I say aggressive, I don't necessarily mean fisticuff aggressive, just, loud and, oh, I want to talk to you and I want to, bring you into these conversations. And you will also, coming with, like meth addiction, comes a hoarding aspect. I mean, so you start seeing, the biggest thing I look for when I'm driving around at meth houses is indoor furniture outside and outside furniture inside. It's a very strange thing, but once you start seeing furniture going outside, and these kinds of things, you just start looking, and then it's a series of things, and like I say, you'll find the paraphernalia, you'll find the artwork. One of the things that happens when they're tweaking is they graffiti on the walls, and I've seen some very beautiful artwork and some very beautiful poetry and writings on walls. It's very dark in its content, but it's there. So it's one of the things that keeps their minds occupied while they're tweaking, while they're on the high. And so you'll find a lot of that on the inside. So if you're doing routine inspections of your property, you can kind of see these things going down, and it's being engaged with your tenants, with your properties, to make sure that it doesn't get out of hand.
Yes, some of these signs are funny that you're speaking of. I was literally driving with my friend the other day, and someone had their couches in their front yard, and we're like, "Is that what's going on here?" And I didn't realize that could be a sign, but it's pretty funny. Anyway, so if a property manager finds, let's say, asbestos, mold, methamphetamine usage, anything like that in their properties, who do you think they should call?
Well, I mean, the first thing to call, they could call myself as a contractor, or the best thing to call is probably a consultant like CK Solutions, because that's the first step. The first step is always to identify the level and the type of hazard that's available. Once that's done, then I can take those documents and I can build a mitigation program. Now, a lot of times what I'll do is they'll call me and say, "Hey, I've got a flood, I've got water, in my basement, I need some help." So then I can go and respond to that and take care of it and get things stabilized. But then I was like, okay, here's what you need to do. You need to call, you need to get some testing done, you need to do this. And then, then we can build a program, because you kind of want background levels so you know what your clearance levels need to be. So the first step is to talk with a consultant, and then move to the contracting, because I have to have that paperwork anyways.
Exactly, and that's why we love partnering with you, Kyle.
Correct.
So, you know, I think we went over a lot today, a lot of really good information. It was good having you on. What are your plans for today?
Oh, you know, just get some proposals out, and then we have some things that the wife and I are going to take care of today. And tonight we're going to a Dwight Yoakam concert. So
Nice. Nice. And I'm coming too.
what's that?
Kidding. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, good talking to you, Kyle. We'll see you here soon on some of our job sites, and we'll talk later.
Great. Say hello to the crowd. Thanks.
Bye.